Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the AI for All podcast. I'm Ryan Chacon. With me is my co-host, Neil Sahota, the AI advisor to the UN and one of the founders of AI for Good. Neil, how's it going?
Doing all right. I'm still kind of in that post Super Bowl going like, whoa, what a game kind of mode right now.
Did you have a rooting interest in it?
I'm originally from New York, so the Giants are my team, but I was pulling for the 49ers in this game.
Some interesting mistakes happened in this game.
I thought it was fascinating that on Monday that they came out saying that the players hadn't prepared for overtime and weren't familiar with the rules. So it's like, it seemed like it might have been good use of an AI coach assistant right there to think of that scenario.
Most fans knew that the rule changed 2 years ago, and the players didn't. But anyways, it's a topic. We got a whole podcast on that game.
As I said, we could do an ancillary podcast for if the audience wants that. But we actually have a fantastic show with an amazing guest today, Ryan.
We do. We're going to be talking about the role of AI in the marketing space. And that's a topic we have not covered yet. To discuss this, we have Brendan Kane, the founder of Hookpoint here. Brendan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a true pleasure to connect with you and everybody that's tuning into this today.
Absolutely. Let's kick this off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself and Hookpoint to our audience.
Yeah, so I'm kind of most known for my work in the social media space. So I'm the author of two books on social media. One is called 1 Million Followers, and the other is Hookpoint, How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. And really started my career in the earliest stages of social media back to 2005 when MySpace and Friendster were kind of the leading dominating factors. And ever since then, really have kind of dedicated my career to understand how to break through the noise, break through the clutter, and reverse engineer what causes content, what causes messages to go viral versus falling flat. So I've basically worked with every type of client and every type of sector around kind of this core ethos of understanding what causes messaging to really resonate and break through to the highest levels.
A good lead into kind of our discussion, because as technology has evolved, as marketing has evolved, as social media, as all these different new platforms have kind of come out and grown, what it takes to go viral is something that so many people are or wish they knew or had a better understanding. And I think when we apply that to organizations and companies who are looking to go viral, who are looking to get more attention on their brand, on their messaging, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make that happen, not just in the creation of the content itself, but also the strategy in which it is then deployed. If you could maybe talk a little bit about it from a high level, that kind of what goes into the process of something going viral, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, so our approach is extremely different than how most people look at it. And I'll kind of start with kind of the two big mistakes that I see people make in trying to engineer their virality of content. The first is that most brands and companies are heavily focused on the quantitative layer, meaning they're looking at pure data of likes, views, shares, click-throughs, conversions, things of that nature, which is obviously a good indicator of something working or not working, but it doesn't uncover the why behind something working or not working. So they're kind of left to figure out if something did go viral, how do we reproduce those results? Or if something doesn't, what elements did or went wrong? The second big mistake that I see in terms of kind of engineering virality or kind of the strategies that people are employing is they're really only looking at their own content. They just keep analyzing their own content. And if your content's stuck at like 10,000 views a video, how are you going to really learn to break through to that next level just analyzing your own? So in terms of how we approach this is number one is we look at the qualitative layer of really understanding what are the specific what we call performance drivers in storytelling that cause content to break through and detract from content to break through. And the second way that we look at it is we don't just look at our clients' own content, we look at the larger social ecosystem. So what we do in terms of our preparation or kind of our process is we're looking at specific storytelling formats or structures that are going viral on specific platforms. So I think that that's one key takeaway that most people don't really understand with social media is there's a clear format that certain people follow, and there's hundreds of these formats. Most people just look at social media as I'm just creating content, posting content. not looking at it from a format perspective. And to give some context, I started my career in the film industry. And if you think about watching a movie, every movie for the past 80 years has followed the same 3 act structure. That's a format. And that is used for drama, action, comedy, horror. No matter the subject matter or the genre, they're using that format. Now, as it pertains to social media, there's many different formats out there. So to give you an example, one very successful format that I'm sure you've seen is called Man on the Street. And it's exactly what you would think is you approach a random stranger on the street and you interact with them in some way. Like I have a friend, Alex Stemp, it's got 20 million followers and he is a fashion photographer. He approaches random strangers on the street, offers them professional photo shoots, and you watch the story unfold from there. So the first step is to understand there are formats out there, understand what is the format that best suited to your brand, and then do a deep qualitative analysis of what causes that format to work. Because most people will look at a format like Man on the Street, and on a surface level, they think they understand what's going on. But what they don't realize is that 99% of people that try that format fail. So, what's the difference between the people that succeed? What's the difference between the people that fail? And that's where the qualitative analysis comes in. And so, what we do is we take a format like that and we'll look at a channel and we'll pull like 5 of the high performers. In that format, it could be 50 million views plus in the high performers. Then we'll look at the average, which is like a few million. And then we'll look at the underperformers, which is like 100,000 views or less. And then what we're doing is we're looking at, from a qualitative standpoint, what's happening in those high performers that's not happening in the average or underperformers. And we look at it through the lens of what I mentioned called performance drivers. So we're looking at things like pacing, tonality, number of edits, first 3 seconds, captions, title cards, facial expressions, body cues. There's over 200 different performance drivers that we look at in terms of this analysis. And what we're trying to understand is what are the contributing factors, and it's really not about the content, it's about the context of those elements that contribute to the successful use of that format versus the unsuccessful use, so that we can really dive in at a deep qualitative level to understand if we are going to do this format, we have a clear blueprint in terms of executing off of it.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of different variables in play here, and you're talking about social media algorithms that are prioritizing or deprioritizing content. I mean, obviously, you have a lot of different market segments. How are you able to actually then tie all these different moving pieces together? I mean, it seems like it's a really complicated analysis.
I mean, it is. And the way that we look at it is as we're doing this analysis, we try and distill it down to, like 3 to 5 core performance drivers. We're not analyzing all like 200 plus of them with a single video, but a lot of pieces do need to fall into place in order for it to be successful. Like, for example, when I was working in the movie industry, it was a fascinating experience because you could have the best script in the world, the best director in the world, the best actor in the world, and the movie could still turn out like crap because like one element would be off in that. So there is kind of nuance in terms of going off and executing with it. But you had mentioned the algorithms and kind of playing to them. And, the algorithms are an interesting subject because people, I think, overthink it. They overanalyze it. These algorithms for social platforms are very simplistic. If you look at their underlying business goal, what is their underlying business goal? To serve more ads. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to retain people each session, each time they log in, the times they log in, as long as possible. So what they're looking for is content that they can see to as many people as possible and grab and hold that attention. So in terms of why does something get 10,000 views versus 10 million views? It's because the 10 million view video did a better job of unfolding a story that captured and held attention longer than other content. So in terms of kind of all the analysis and pulling things together, it's really about how do we use this analysis to just tell a more compelling story. And the more and more you do it, the better and better that you get and start seeing the patterns and executing at a high level.
That goes to your book, which I've read. It's a fantastic book, Hook Point, that you literally have 3 seconds to capture someone's attention because there's just such a flood of content. That sounds like even if you get them in that first 3 seconds, you have to do something like the next 10 seconds or next 30 seconds to keep them there.
Yeah. So we as the title states, we live in a 3-second world from the ability to capture attention. Now, that doesn't mean people kind of equate our world to micro attention and they think just people have micro attention spans. But once you've grabbed their attention, they will stick with you as long as the story is engaging or unfolds. It's the reason people will binge watch a series on Netflix. They get enveloped in a story and a character, and they'll sit for 10 hours and watch an entire season of a show, or why people will listen to podcasts and listen to long form. In order to kind of break through, we still need to win those first 3 seconds, because if we don't win those first 3 seconds and grab their attention and say, hey, this is something worth paying attention to, you never get that chance to demonstrate to the viewer or the listener that, hey, this is worth spending a lot of time with.
How do you leverage like some of these tools like AI to facilitate your work?
The way that we're kind of looking at AI and leveraging AI is taking our qualitative analysis and pumping it into AI platforms. Because as you guys know, these are very powerful tools, but they're as only good as the input and the understanding of the output as well. So what we're using it for predominantly right now, because the visual nature is getting there, but it's not quite there, is an example is script writing. So what we do is we use all these qualitative elements for a specific format, and then we use the key findings to pump that in. We create script templates, pump those script templates into AI with the qualitative analysis, and then we analyze the output and then refine the output there. So we're using it on the front end, but we're also using it on the back end of our understanding of the analysis and why things are working, to make sure that we're getting the best quality and the best use of these tools. And we're still testing kind of the visual nature of how we, in the future, as it gets better, control all the visual elements through editing or AI avatars and those natures, or that nature, to maximize the power of these tools going forward. But again, we kind of look at it as a tool, not an all-end solution. And we look at it as a tool to pump our analysis in, and then use our analysis to analyze the output to make sure that we're maximizing the potential that these tools provide.
Outside of the work that you all do internally, how are you seeing AI play even larger role in the marketing for organizations? Just from kind of just your vantage point, how are you seeing AI just change the landscape when it comes to marketing for organizations in other industries, or just other people that you talk to that are in the space? What are you seeing really happen?
I think in some ways, as I talked about, I think people think it's a cheat code to be like, oh, this tool is going to solve virality for us and solve our marketing issues. And I think in some ways, and it's the same with social media. Social media is a blessing and a curse, in that anybody can pick up a phone, press record, post something. So it's a blessing that it's this powerful tool that anybody can post a message to the world. The curse is there's not a lot of thought process that goes into actually using this tool versus, I went to film school. You spend years studying directors, understanding dialogue, writing, script writing, all these elements. I think that's happening a little bit with AI too at this juncture, is like, ChatGPT, amazing tool, but it's made it so easy that most people kind of just think, oh, I'm just going to put in a question and I'm going to get this magical answer to solve everything. So I think that from a marketing perspective of kind of where we're at today, I think that there's a lot of kind of hoping that this is just going to solve a larger underlying issue, which is how do we tell better stories and really engage people, capture their attention, hold their attention. And I think that people are just relying too heavily on AI to solve those, versus, again, you need to have that fundamental understanding of what you're looking at and what you're feeding it and how to analyze it from the back end. So I think that there's going to be, and I think it's starting to happen a little bit, of people starting to understand that there's kind of more thought that needs to go into how to use these tools to maximize the benefit on the back end of it.
And you mentioned two things earlier. You talked about the input into a tool, and then obviously the output. When it comes to the data side of this, we understand, I think, just at a high, I mean, from all of our conversations in the past, why data is so important when it comes to AI in general. But how do you see, or what advice do you have for companies looking to make sure that they have the best data available to use for any tool, whether it's so working with you all, working with other organizations? Why is data so important, and how can they ensure that they're working to get the best data possible?
In terms of kind of the work that we do, we're heavily focused on the qualitative layer. And why I think that that's so important is that there is tremendous value in quantitative, but when we're talking about storytelling and how to become better storytellers, how to go viral, how to create better marketing, it really comes down to these qualitative elements. And I would say 9 out of 10 companies I talk to, they're not doing any of that type of analysis. So, what my first recommendation would be is yes, continue down that path in the quantitative layer, but really, how do you build a process, a system, or even educating your internal team of understanding the qualitative elements that drive to kind of breakthrough performance? For us, I mean, we're just creating Google spreadsheets. We're not using fancy technology or anything like that, but we spend the long man hours to kind of break these things down. But I think that the first step is, in terms of starting, is just having internal conversations with your team, creating a structure to actually look at the qualitative elements and really understand what's the difference between a high performer and a low performer, and then pump that analysis into any AI tool that you're using.
Are people able to do that? Because I think about this, that there's obviously a good chunk of like data science involved here. Can like the average marketer look at some of the stuff and say, okay, it's this kind of combination of qualitative metrics that are really driving it, or is it that just the average person, because this is typically what I see, they think it's like this one or two things that jumps out at them and thinks, okay, that's the secret to unlocking success.
It's a great question. And when I give my keynotes, I actually do a qualitative analysis exercise with the audience where I put two videos, same format, same creator on the screen. We watch both, and then I ask them which one performed better. And 99% of the time, they get it right of which one performed better. And then we reveal the results of what drove that performance. And it does take some time to kind of like get good at it, but I'm surprised more and more that people have these skill sets. They just don't even kind of look at content in that perspective. The simple exercise of putting two pieces of content on the screen and just talking through what's the difference between them, that's qualitative analysis at a very high level. And the more that you do that, the more that you learn that, you build that skill set. It's the same thing where most people could sit down, or most people do this. They sit down, they watch a movie, and they say that was a great movie or that was a bad movie. And typically it will align with kind of like what the top critics in the world do. But most of us don't sit down and talk about the differences between a filmmaker making an amazing film and a film that's just not that great. So just the pure exercise of awareness and keep doing that will kind of build that skill set within people. So I don't think that you need to be a marketing wizard in order to do it. Now, marketing people with a lot of marketing experience may pick up on nuances quicker than other people, but it is an exercise that people can do. Like I just did it for, I think it was like 500 mortgage loan officers. So you don't think them as, it's not like creative directors, and I did 4 exercises with them and they got it right every time. Now, did they understand all the nuances and the difference between the two? No, but they did pick up on there was a difference, and that's the first step to then taking to the next level to do that type of analysis.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I was going to ask you if you feel like with the growth of these new tools and technologies and AI and so forth, if it requires organizations to adjust the way they hire for marketing positions. If there's a certain skill set that is required kind of as we look into the future in order to do marketing well compared to maybe what was required, in the past. Do you see any type of because it sounded like from that part of the conversation, it sounded like people have these skills internally. They may just not know how to think about it or how to approach it. But what do you think about kind of the future of marketing with new technologies, with AI, new data, all that kind of stuff, and what's required to kind of do that job well for an organization?
It's a great question. And I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges we face in having success in working with clients is purely a mindset perspective. So, in terms of when we hire or we advise clients in hiring, we're not looking for the most skilled or experienced person. We're looking for the person that has the most mindset, that is open to learning, open to adapting to things. So, a lot of these kind of tools and processes, they can be trained and they can be trained relatively quickly. But the people that succeed, like some of our best case studies, are people with no social media experience creating content on their iPhone. And the reason that they're successful and sometimes more successful than our multi-billion-dollar a year corporate clients is just that eagerness, that openness to kind of learn and to adapt to these new ways of leveraging tools, to storytelling and things of that nature. So, in terms of hiring, is especially as you look to AI, and I'm talking specifically of how you leverage AI tools, not building AI technology, is really find, and I don't think it necessarily has to be an age thing, although typically the younger the person is, the more kind of eager and hungry they are to learn, but just somebody that, or a group of people that are just always looking to perform better, always open to removing preconceived notions, things that they thought were the right way of doing things, or they were trained to do something, years ago, and now they have to kind of forget all of that and look at the world in a new way. And I think that that's also kind of, you see that the early adopters of AI, those are people that are kind of looking at the world in a different way and challenging the way that we've done things in the past instead of fighting against it.
It's like you almost have to unlearn. Ironically, we had a conversation within the UN this morning about some of these things that you look at, like Africa and parts of Asia, they never had a landline infrastructure, right? And so when you had essentially the release of mobile phones and the smartphones, they were the ones that really started pioneering things like mobile payments and some of these things because they weren't locked in the mode of thinking of this is how landlines work. So that like leapfrog moment. It sounds like people that are less experienced or no experience can tap into that, but it sounds like there's a path for people who've been doing this for 10, 15 years to almost step back and find a different way of doing this.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. You used the perfect word, Neil: unlearn. We run into that a lot. And I'll give you a prime example is thinking back pre-social media, there was all of these creative processes that were developed. And one of the key things that we hear a lot is people are trained or taught that you're creating a niche message for a niche audience. Now, if we're talking about virality and how to get content to break through at the highest level, we actually, train people to think the opposite of what we call the generalist principle. Is we still want to create a core message and story that resonates with our core audience, but how do we make that core message or story interesting to anybody without diluting down what we're trying to achieve? Because again, if you think about the social media algorithms, they want to seed content to the widest possible audience and retain attention. They are not going to do the hard work and see, oh, you're an accountant. This piece of content was designed for only people that are interested in for accounting, because in reality, they don't have to do that heavy work for you, because they have so much content to choose from. In addition, that mindset typically leads to poor storytelling. And I'll give you an example. Is there's a YouTuber that teaches finance to millennials. Now, finance is not a sexy subject, especially teaching it to millennials. It's difficult. His most viewed video is how I bought a Tesla for $78 a month. So with that context, anybody would be interested to see how this young guy bought a Tesla for $78 a month. And within that, he's teaching the principles of car financing. And that video got like something like 10 million views. If that video was positioned the top 5 ways to finance a car for millennials, it would have probably gotten 10,000 views. So just the dynamic of this generalist principle of how we shift and unlearn this thing that we've been told in the past, that we need to create a niche message for a niche audience. We break the mold of that, and then we can expand our message to the world, and with that, our core audience grows. So if it was the top 5 principles for car financing for millennials and it was 10,000 views, let's just say 8,000 of those 10,000, 80% was our core target. Now, let's just say it was out of that 10 million views of how I bought a Tesla for $78 a month, our core target was only 20% of those views. It's 2 million people versus 8,000. It's like, which one would you rather have? Now, that completely goes against what was taught in marketing agencies, marketing schools, marketing books 20 years ago. And that's kind of, Neil, to what you said, is this unlearning of looking at content, looking at the world in a completely different way.
You're almost having to generify your market, not your target market, but the way you appeal to the market segments.
Yeah, but without diluting your core message and what you represent. But that's where you'll see on social media, people think that, oh, my subject matter is not sexy enough to break through. You'll see tax accountants go viral. I just had a meeting with a botanist that's gone viral. Fitness, nutrition, real estate, any subject matter with the right context can go viral and build a massive audience. But it's looking at the world in a completely different way and unlearning what they told you in terms of how to market previously.
Yeah, I'll say just from my own experience with social media recently, I've been spending more time is on Instagram in the Reels, which is going to be feeding me many different kinds of things. And I've been able to discover topics that I probably would not have discovered on my own through search or through the accounts that I follow. So obviously, I know there's work behind the scenes from an algorithm standpoint feeding me these things, but the way that these people of all different ages are approaching a lot of these topics that, if you were to think of them on the surface, are potentially dull and boring, to make them applicable to something that someone of my age would be interested in. I've learned about industries and different things that I would never have gone and kind of discovered on my own. And I think it's based on what you're saying, the approach they're taking to make it more general while still honing in on their target audience is very effective.
I mean, you could even look at it from an analogy of movies. Is like movies that take a subject matter that may not be interesting to you on a surface level. Like, just think about the Fast and the Furious franchises. How many people were interested in street racing before Fast and the Furious? But it's one of the most successful movie franchises because of the story and the context around the subject matter. And it's the same thing with social media. What's the story and the context around your specific expertise? Like, there's a guy, and I can't remember his name, but he has a love for trains, and he has millions of followers watching him interact with trains. And you would never think that that would be something that most people would find interesting. And that's really where social media has gone to, and kind of just a testament to the best storytellers that can take these abstract or typically small niches and turn them into something that's massive.
I think there's a lot of great info here, and I think maybe we need to also help set expectations for marketers and our audience here. This is not like a cheat code that it happens overnight. And that's been my experience with a lot of emerging technology, like AI or the metaverse, that people think, I'm going to use this tool and bam, I'm see results right away. How long does it actually take? All these things you're talking about that needs to be done, Brendan, how long before people really see that kind of change and the value get created?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's not a clear-cut answer to it. Some people, like you said, it's not a cheat code. It's not any. It's just like, how can you become a masterful storyteller? And that's why we simplify it for people. Is like, one takeaway from this conversation today is start looking at social media from a format perspective. Realize that there are formats out there. Find the format that works for you, that excites you, and then just dig a little bit deeper. That will set you apart from 99% of content creators out there, because 99% of them are not looking at the world in that way. Now, in terms of how long it takes you to see results using that format dictates how quickly can you master that specific format. Some people will get it in a few weeks. Some people will get it in a year. Some people will give up and never see the results. So I would just start, possibly, especially if you're a beginner, or somebody that maybe you're not a beginner to social media, but you just really haven't seen the results. You don't have a lot of resources. maybe look at formats that you can do on your own. Like there's another businessman, Robert Croak, who's got 1 million followers on TikTok. He shares his 25 years of experience with walking listicles, where he's literally talking to his phone, walking around the block, but he has a format that really kind of shares information in a very digestible and an inspiring way. He built 1 million followers just doing things into his iPhone. So I think looking at a format that you feel passionate about, that you feel can work for you, that you'd be excited to work on, and then focus on mastering those details. And again, the time frame is all across the board, and it just comes down to your ability to leverage that format to tell a compelling story.
Where do you have your attention set on kind of paying attention to new technologies, where AI is going, just or the space in general that the people listening to this should also be trying to pay attention to on how it's going to influence what they do on the marketing side, how it's going to help them be more efficient and see better success with marketing. Just generally speaking on that topic, where should people be paying attention, and what are you most looking forward to?
I kind of look at things in like 5-year increments. I'm not as close to the technology to understand what's happening beyond 5 years. But I would just say is at least for the next 5 years, the big players, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, they're not going to waver. It's not like overnight they are going to disappear. So in terms of marketing, I would just be looking at AI, looking at understanding qualitative elements of storytelling, how to leverage AI to maximize off those learnings from a qualitative standpoint to really accelerate your growth, because there's still a massive opportunity with that. So in some ways, I would say go back to the basics of understanding that marketing and creating content is you just telling a story and trying to engage and retain an audience through that story, and become a master of those storytelling elements, and then leverage AI to maximize the potential of those learnings and those data sets. Beyond that, it's interesting with kind of what Apple's done with Vision Pro, where there's so much interest driven around that versus what like Google Glass or Snapchat glasses tried to do back in the day. Is if you really want to look forecast into the future of social media, it's going to be driven by the hardware. And this is why Zuckerberg invested so much into VR and AR, is because he realized that he's beholden to Android and the iPhone, where he wants to try and control the future of what the hardware looks like. But if you want to kind of forecast beyond that 5-year window, is just pay attention to the advancements in hardware and where that's going. I think Vision Pro is an interesting technology. Let's kind of see what the adoption rate is in the evolution of that type of technology and where it goes. But all of these social platforms, all of these marketing channels are beholden to the hardware that it's served up on. So the hardware is always going to dictate where these things go, what platforms are going to succeed in the future, which ones are going to survive.
I think you've given our audience some great things to think about, and also great ways to just try to remove themselves and, as Neil said, unlearn some things to see what's being successful in the space, for them to understand how these kind of templates and how these structures, how these different things are being put together, and what's being successful and what's not. Neil, any last questions or words from your end?
I think it's been a fascinating conversation. We have some powerful tools, but I think Brendan has given us all great advice, and that this really is shaped around our ability to tell stories. You need that good hook point, but first and foremost step is the format. If our audience would like to learn more about you, your work, what's the best way to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, they can visit hookpoint.com for more information. I do respond to messages on LinkedIn and Instagram. So I would just kind of follow up there. I've got a new book coming out in a few months, so if they kind of just follow those channels, there'll be some announcements of when they can get access to that new book.
Can you give us a teaser on what this book is about?
Yeah, it's called The Guide to Going Viral, and basically it breaks down our entire creative model in depth. So it breaks down qualitative research, how we do the research, how you can do it yourself. So we go from all the way from research all the way to analyzing data, and reveal every kind of aspect of the process that we've been developing over the past 4 or 5 years.
Well, I'll definitely personally be checking that out. So that'd be great. Brendan, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate your time. Great insights, topic we haven't covered before. Love what you guys have going on over there. So really appreciate you kind of coming on and talking with our audience a bit.
It was my pleasure to connect with you and everybody that was tuning in for this today.